Chapter 21 of Snowdrift, A Story of the Land of the Strong Cold, by James Hendryx. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Snowdrift, by James Hendryx. Chapter 21. The Passing of Wananebish. Stepping across to a duffel bag, Brent produced a shirt and an undershirt which he tossed to the girl, who, in the weakness of sudden reaction, had thrown herself sobbing upon the bunk. "There, there, darling," he soothed as with his back toward her, his eyes roved about the room seeking to picture, in the wild disorder, the terrific struggle that had taken place. "Put on those things, and then you can tell me all about it. You're all right now, dear. I will never leave you again." "But, oh, if you had not come," sobbed the girl. "But I did come, sweetheart, and everything is all right. Forget the whole horrid business. Come, we will go straight to Wananebish. Not another hour nor a minute will we wait. We will make her tell the truth. I have never believed you were her daughter, and now I know." "But," faltered the girl, as she slipped into the warm garments, "if I am not her daughter, who am I? Oh, it is horrible not to know who you are. If this is true, she must tell, she has got to tell me. I have the right to know. And my mother and my father, where are they? Who are they?" "We will know soon, darling," assured Brent, drawing her to him and looking down into her uplifted eyes. "But first, let me tell you this. I don't care who you are. You are mine now, dearest, the one woman for me in all the world. And no matter who or what your parents were, you are mine, mine, mine." His lips met hers, her arms stole about his neck, and as she clung to him, she whispered, "Oh, everything seems all strange, and unreal, and upside down, and horrible. And in all the world, darling, you are the one being who is good, and sane, and strong. Oh, I love you so. Don't ever leave me again." "Never again," assured Brent, smiling down into the dark eyes raised so pleadingly to his. "And now, do you feel able to strike out for the camp?" "I feel able to go to the end of the earth with you," she answered quickly, and he noticed that her voice had assumed its natural buoyancy, and that her movements were lithe and sure as she stooped to lace her snowshoes, and he marveled at the perfect resiliency of nerves that could so quickly regain their poise after the terrible ordeal to which they had been subjected. "Where is Claw?" he asked abruptly, as he stooped and recovered his gold sack from the floor where the captain had dropped it. "Come, we must hurry!" cried the girl, who in the excitement had forgotten his very existence. "He started for the camp to trade hooch to the Indians, and oh, hurry!" she cried, as she plunged out into the night. "He hates Wananebish, and he threatened to get even with her. If he should kill her now, before she could tell us—" She was already descending the bank to the river when Brent, recovering his rifle, hastened after her, and although he exerted himself to the utmost, the flying figure gradually drew away from him. When it had all but disappeared in the darkness, he called, and the girl waited, whereupon Brent, despite her protest, took the lead, and with his rifle ready for instant use, hastened on up the river. A half-mile from the encampment, Brent struck into the scattered timber. "He may watch the back trail," he flung back over his shoulder, "and we don't want to walk into a trap." Rapidly they made their way through the scrub, and upon the edge of the clearing they paused. In the wide space before one of the cabins, brush fires were blazing, and by the light of the leaping flames the Indians could be seen crowding and fighting to get to the door of the cabin. Brent drew Snowdrift into the shelter of a bush, from which point of vantage they watched Claw, who stood in the doorway, glass in one hand, six-gun in the other, dispensing hooch. Standing by his side, Yondo received the skins from the crowding Indians and tossed them into the cabin. The process was beautifully simple, a drink for a skin. As Yondo took a skin, Claw passed out a drink to its erstwhile owner. "Damn him," muttered Brent, raising his rifle. But Snowdrift pushed it aside. "It is too dark," she whispered. "You can't see the sights, and you might hit one of the Indians." Breaking off sharply, she pointed toward her own cabin. The door had been thrown open, and, rifle in hand, old Wananebish stepped out on the snow. She raised the rifle, and with loud cries the Indians surged back from about the hooch runner. Before the rifle could speak, Claw fired, and dropping her gun, old Wananebish staggered a few steps forward and pitched headlong into the snow. With a yell of rage, Brent broke cover and dashed straight across the clearing. As the cry reached him, Claw looked up, fired one hasty shot at the approaching figure, and leaping straight through the throng of Indians, disappeared in the scrub beyond the cabin, with Yondo close at his heels. Brent was aware that Snowdrift was at his side. "Go to her," panted the girl. "I will try to handle the Indians." For an instant he hesitated, then, realizing that the girl could deal with her own band better without his presence, he hastened to the squaw, who had raised herself to an elbow and was vainly trying to rise. Picking her up bodily, Brent carried her into the cabin and placed her upon the bunk. "Where is she?" the woman gasped, as he tore open her shirt and endeavored to staunch the flow of blood from a wound low down upon the sunken chest. "She's all right," assured the man. "Claw has gone, and she is trying to quiet the Indians." The old crone shook her head. "No use." She whispered the words with difficulty. "Take her away, while there is time. They are crazy for hooch, and they will sell her to him." She sank back, gasping, and Brent held a cup of water to her lips as he motioned her to be quiet. "I am going to take her," he answered. "But tell me, who is Snowdrift?" The beady eyes fixed his with a long, searching stare. She was about to speak when the door opened, and Snowdrift herself burst into the room and sank down beside the bunk. With a laboring effort the old woman laid a claw-like hand upon the girl's arm. "Forgive me," she whispered, and summoning all her fast-ebbing strength, she gasped, "It is all a lie. You are not my child. You are white. I loved you, and I was afraid you would go to your people." A paroxysm of coughing seized her, and a gush of red blood welled from her lips. "Look in the moss bag," she croaked, the words gurgling through her blood-flooded throat. She fell heavily back upon the blanket, and the red torrent gushed afresh from between the stilled lips. With a dry sob, Snowdrift turned to Brent. "We must go," she faltered, hurriedly. "I can do nothing with the Indians. I tried to reach the hooch to destroy it, but they crowded me away. He has lied to them, won them completely over by the promise of more hooch. He told them he has plenty of hooch cached in the scrub. Already they have sent runners to bring him back, and when he comes—" The girl paused and shuddered. "They will do anything he tells them to, for hooch, and you know what that will be. Come, we must go while we have time." "Can't we stay and fight him?" cried Brent. "Surely some of the Indians will be with us." "No. Only a few of the squaws, and they would be no good. No, we must go before they bring him back. My sled is beside the door. Hurry and load it with supplies while I harness the dogs." As she talked, the girl's hands searched beneath the blankets upon which lay the body of the squaw, and with a low cry she drew forth the moss bag which she handed to Brent. "Take it," she said, "and do not trust it to the sled. We have no time to look into it now, but that little bag contains the secret of my life." "And I will guard it with my own," cried Brent, as he took the bag from her hand. "Hurry now and harness the dogs. I'll throw in some grub and blankets, and we will finish the outfit at my cabin where we'll pick up Joe Pete." While Brent worked at the lashings of the sled pack, Snowdrift slipped silently into the cabin, and crossing to the bunk, bent low over the still form of the squaw. "Good-bye, Wananebish," she sobbed, as she pressed her lips to the wrinkled forehead. "I don't know what you have done, nor why you did it, but I forgive you." She turned to see Brent examining the two heavy crotches that were fixed, one on either side of the doorway on the inside. "That is our lock," explained the girl. "See, there is the bar that goes across the door, like the bar at the post at Fort Norman. Wananebish made it, and every night when we were inside she placed the bar in the crotches and no one could have got in without smashing the door to pieces. Ever since I returned from the mission, Wananebish has feared someone, and now I know it was Claw." "If we could only drop the bar from the outside," mused Brent. "Maybe we could gain a lot of time. I know Claw, and when he finds that he has all the Indians with him, and that we are only two, he is not going to give you up without a struggle. By George," he exclaimed suddenly, "I believe I can do it." He motioned the girl outside, and slipped the bar into the crotch at the hinge side of the door, then driving a knife upon the inside, he rested the bar upon it, and stepping outside, banged the door shut. The knife held, and opening the door, he loosened the blade a little, and tried again. This time the banging of the door jarred the knife loose. It fell to the floor, and the heavy bar dropped into place, and the man smiled with satisfaction as he threw his weight against the door. "That will keep them busy for a while," he said. "They'll think we're in there, and they know we're armed, so they won't be any too anxious to mix things up at close quarters." Swiftly the dogs flew up the well-packed trail toward Brent's cabin. The night was dark, and the Indians were fighting over the rum cask that Claw had abandoned. As they hurried down the river, the two cast more than one glance over their shoulders toward the cabin where the Indians milled about in the firelight. At the first bend of the river they paused and looked back. Shots were being fired in scattering volleys, and suddenly Snowdrift grasped Brent's arm. "Look," she cried, "at our cabin." At first Brent could see nothing but the distant glow of the brush fires. Then from the direction of the cabin they had just left, a tongue of flame shot upward through the darkness. There were more shots, and the flames widened and leaped higher. "They're piling brush against the cabin," cried Brent. "They think they'll burn us out. Come on, we haven't a minute to lose, for when Claw learns that we are not in the cabin, he'll be on our trail." At his own shack, Brent tore the lashings from the sled and began to rearrange the pack, adding supplies from his stores. Joe Pete stared in astonishment. "Come on here," cried Brent. "Get to work. We're off for Dawson, and we've got to take grub enough to last till we hit Fort Norman." "All day long you have been on the trail," cried the girl. You are tired. Can't we stand them off here until you are rested?" Brent shook his head. "You saw what happened at the other cabin," he answered. "And here it would be even worse. With the window and the door on the same side, they could burn us out in no time." "But they will trail us, and we must travel heavy." She pointed to the loaded sled. "We will take our chances in the open," said Brent, grimly. "And if luck favors us we will get a long lead. The Indians may get too drunk to follow, or they may stop to loot my cabin, and even if they should overtake us, we can give a good account of ourselves. We have 3 rifles, and the Indians can't shoot, and Claw will not risk his own hide. Strike out straight for Fort Norman, Joe Pete. We will take turns breaking trail." At daylight they camped upon the apex of a high ridge that commanded a 6 or 7 mile sweep of the back trail, and all 3 noted with relief that the stiff wind had filled their trail with the shifting snow. All through the night they had avoided the timbered swamps and the patches of scrub, both for the purpose of allowing the wind full sweep at their trail, and also to force their pursuers to expose themselves to the open. It was decided that until danger of pursuit was past, they would travel only at night, and thus eliminate in so far as possible the danger of a surprise attack. Because the men had been on the trail almost constantly for 24 hours, Snowdrift insisted upon standing first watch, and as Brent unrolled his blankets, he removed the moss bag from his shoulders and handed it to the girl. Both he and Joe Pete were asleep the instant they hit the blankets, and for a long time Snowdrift sat with the moss bag hugged close, and her eyes fixed upon the long sweep of back trail. At length she thrust her hand into the bag and withdrew the packet, secure in its waterproof wrapping. Over and over she turned it in her hand, as she speculated, womanlike, upon its contents. Time and again she essayed to untie the thong that bound it, but each time her fingers were stilled before the knot was undone. "Oh, I am afraid, afraid," she murmured, when her burning curiosity urged her fingers to do their task. "Suppose my father was a man like those 2. Suppose he was Claw himself." She shuddered at the thought. "No, no," she whispered. "Wananebish said that he was good. My mother, then, who was she? Is some terrible stigma attached to her name?" "Better never to know who I am, than to know that." For a moment she held the packet above the little flames of her fire, as though she would drop it in. But even as she held it, she knew she would not destroy it, for she decided that even to know the worst would be better than the gnawing of lifelong uncertainty. "He, too, has the right to know," she murmured, "and we will open it together." And with a sigh she replaced the packet in the bag, and returned to her scrutiny of the back trail. Despite the agreement to divide equally the time of watching, the girl resolved to let the men sleep until midday before calling Brent, who was to take the second watch. At noon Brent awoke of his own accord, and the girl was startled by the sound of his voice in her ear. "Anything doing?" "No," she answered. "Not even a wolf or a caribou has crossed the open." "Have you explored that?" He indicated the moss bag with a nod, and the girl was quick to note the carefully suppressed eagerness of the words. "No. I waited. I wanted you, and I was afraid." "Nonsense, darling," laughed the man. "I am not afraid. Give me the bag. Again I swear to you, I do not care who you are. You are mine, and nothing else matters." Snowdrift slipped her hand into the bag and withdrew the packet, and she handed it to Brent. He placed his arm about her shoulders and drew her close against his side, and with her head resting upon his shoulders, her eyes followed his every moment as his fingers fumbled at the knot. Carefully he unwrapped the waterproof covering and disclosed a small leather notebook, and a thick packet wound round with a parchment deerskin. On the flyleaf of the notebook, in a round, clear hand, was written the name Murdo McFarlane, and below, Lashing Water. "Murdo McFarlane!" cried Brent. "Why, that's the name in the book that told of Hearne's lost mines. The book that brought me over here." "And the name on the knife! See, I have it here!" exclaimed the girl. "But go on. Who was McFarlane, and what has he to do with me?" Eagerly Brent read aloud the closely written pages that told of the life of Murdo McFarlane, of his boyhood in Scotland, of his journey to Canada, his service with the Hudson's Bay Company, his courtship of Margot Molaire, and their marriage to the accompaniment of the booming of the bells of St. Anne's, of the birth of their baby, the little Margot, of his restless longing for gold, that his wife and baby need not live out their lives in the outlands, of the visit of Wananebish and her little band of Dog Ribs, of his venture into the barrens, accompanied by his wife and little baby, of the cabin beside the nameless lake and the year of fruitless search for gold in the barrens. "Oh, that is it! That is it! The memory!" cried the girl. "What do you mean? What memory?" "Always I have had it, the memory. Time and again it comes back to me, but I can never seem to grasp it. A cabin, a beautiful woman who leaned over me and talked to me, and a big man who took me up in his arms, a lake beside the cabin, and that is all. Dim and elusive always, I have tried for hours at a time to bring it sharply into mind, but it was no use. The memory would fade, and in its place would be the tepee, or my little room at the mission. But go on. What became of Murdo McFarlane and Margot, of my father and my mother? And why have I always lived with Wananebish?" Brent read the closing lines with many a pause, and with many a catch in his voice, the lines which told of the death of Margot, and of his determination to take the baby and leave her with Wananebish until he should return to her, of his leaving with the squaw all of his money, £500 in good banknotes, with instructions to use it for her keep and education in case he did not return. And so he came to the concluding paragraph, which read, "In the morning I shall carry my wee Margot to the Indian woman. It is the only thing I can do. And then I shall strike north for gold. But first I must return to this cabin and bury my dead. God, why did she have to die? She should be buried beside her mother in the little graveyard at St. Anne's. But it cannot be. Upon a high point that juts out onto the lake I will dig her grave, upon a point where we used often to go and watch the sunset, she and I and the little one. And there she will lie, while far below her the booming and the thunder of the wind-lashing waters of the lake will rise about her like the sound of bells, her requiem, like the tolling of the bells of St. Anne's." "Oh, where is he now, my father?" sobbed the girl as he concluded. Brent's arm tightened about her shoulders. "He is dead," he whispered. "He has been dead for these many years, or he would have found you. he swept his arm toward the barrens. "Somewhere in this great white land your father met his death. And it was a man's death, the kind of death he would have welcomed, for he was a man. The whole North is his grave, and out of it his spirit kept calling, calling. And the call was heard, by a drunkard in a little cabin on the Yukon. I am that drunkard, and into my keeping the spirit of Murdo McFarlane has entrusted the life of his baby, his wee Margot." Brent paused, and his voice suddenly cut hard as steel. "And may God Almighty strike me dead if I ever violate that trust." Slender brown fingers were upon his lips. "Don't talk like that, dear. It scares me. See, I am not afraid. And you are not a drunkard." "I got drunk on the Belva Lou." "Didn't I say we couldn't expect to win all the battles?" "And I carry my bottle with me." He reached into his blankets and drew out the bottle of rum. "And the cork has not been pulled," flashed the girl. "And you have carried it ever since you left the whaler." "Yes, darling," answered the man softly. "And I always shall keep it, and I never will pull the cork. I can give you that promise now. I can promise you, on the word of a Brent, that—" "Not yet, sweetheart, please," interrupted the girl. "Let us hold back the promise till we need it. That promise is our heavy artillery. This is only the beginning of the war, and no good general would show the enemy all he has got, right in the beginning." "You wonder woman," laughed Brent, as he smothered the upraised eyes with kisses. "But see, we have not opened the packet." Carefully he unwound the parchment wrapping, and disclosed a closely packed pile of banknotes. So long had they remained undisturbed that their edges had stuck together, so that it was with difficulty he succeeded in counting them. 100, he announced at length. 100 5-pound notes of the Bank of England. "Why, Wananebish never used any of the money!" cried the girl. Brent shook his head. "Not a penny has been touched. I doubt that she ever even opened the packet." "Poor old Wananebish," murmured the girl. "And she needed it so. But she saved it all for me." When darkness gathered, they again hit the trail. A last look from the ridge disclosed no sign of pursuit, and that night they made 25 miles. For 3 more nights they traveled, and then upon the shore of Great Bear Lake they gave up the night travel and continued their journey by daylight. Upon the evening of the 18th day they pulled into Fort Norman, where they outfitted for the long trail to the Yukon. Before she left, Snowdrift paid the debt of 1,000 skins that McTavish had extended to the Indians, and the following morning the outfit pulled out and headed for the mountains which were just visible far to the westward. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Snowdrift, a story of the land of the strong cold, by James Hendryx. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Snowdrift by James Hendryx. Chapter 22. Claw Hits for Dawson. When Claw returned to the flame-lighted clearing, a scant half-hour after he had fled from the avenging figure of Brent, it was to find his keg of rum more than half consumed, and most of the Indians howling drunk. Close about him they crowded, pressing skins upon him and demanding more liquor. The man was quick to see that despite the appearance of Brent and the girl, he held the upper hand. The Indians would remain his as long as the rum held out. "Ask him where the white man went, him and the girl," he ordered Yondo. The Indian pointed to the cabin of Wananebish, and a devilish gleam leaped into Claw's eyes. "Tell him I'll give him a hull keg of rum, or $100, cash money to the man that kills him," he shouted, "and another keg to the one that brings me the girl." The drunken savages heard the offer with a whoop, and yelling like fiends, they rushed to the cabin. The barred door held against their attack, and with sinister singleness of purpose they rushed back to the fires, and securing blazing faggots began to pile brush against the wall of the building. With an evil grin in his face, Claw took up his position behind a stump that gave unobstructed view of the door through which the two must rush from the burning cabin, and waited, revolver in hand. Louder roared the fire, and higher shot the flames, but the door remained closed. Claw waited, knowing that it would take some time for the logs to burn through. But when at length the whole cabin was a mass of flames, and the roof caved in, his rage burst forth in a tirade of abuse. "They lied," he shrilled. "They wasn't in there. Ace In the Hole wouldn't never stayed in there and burnt up. The Injuns lied, and he's layin' to get me. Maybe he's got a bead on me right now." And in a sudden excess of terror, the man started to burrow into the snow. Yondo stopped, and in the bright light of the flames examined the trail to the river. Then he pointed down the stream in the direction of Brent's cabin, and Claw, too, examined the trail. "They've pulled out," he cried. "Pulled out for his shack. Tell him to come on. We'll burn him out up there. I ain't a-goin' to let her get away from me now, and to hell with Cap Jenkins. I'll take her to Dawson and make real money offen her. And I'll get Ace In the Hole, too. I found that girl first. She's mine, and by God, I'll have her." He started for the river. At the top of the bank he paused. "What's ailin' 'em?" he roared. "Why don't they come? Standin' there gogglin' like fools." "They say," explained Yondo, in jargon, "that they want to see the rum first." "Tell 'em I left it up to his shack," roared the man. "Tell 'em anything, just so they come. Get my dogs, and come on. We'll lead out, and they'll foller if they think there's hooch in it." Yondo headed the dogs down the trail, and Claw threw himself upon the sled and watched the drunken Indians string out behind, yelling, whooping, staggering and falling in their eagerness for more hooch. When they came in sight of the cabin, Claw saw that it was dark. "You slip up and see what you can find out," he ordered Yondo, "and I'll stay here with the dogs and handle the Indians when they come along." 5 minutes later the Indian returned and reported that there was no one in the cabin, and that the door was open. With a curse, Claw headed the dogs up the bank and pushed through the open door. Match in hand, he stumbled and fell sprawling over the body of the captain of the Belva Lou, uttering a shriek of terror as his bare hand came in contact with the hairy face. Scrambling to his feet, he fumbled for another match, and with trembling fingers managed to light the little bracket lamp. "Choked him to death bare-handed," he cried in horror. "And he'd have done me that way, too. But where be they? Look, they been here." The man pointed to the disordered supplies that had been thrown about in the haste of departure. "They've pulled out," he cried. "Get out there and find their trail." Yondo returned and pointed to the westward, holding up 3 fingers and making the sign of a heavily loaded sled. "That'll be him and her and the Injun," said Claw, "and they're hittin' for Fort Norman." Reaching down, he picked up a sack of flour, and carrying it out to the sled, ordered Yondo to help with the other supplies. Suddenly he sprang erect and gazed toward the west. "I wonder if he would," he cried aloud. "I'll bet he'll take her clean to Dawson." He laughed harshly. "And if he does, she's mine, mine, and no trouble nor risk taking her there. Onct back among the saloons, Ace In The Hole will start in on the hooch, and then I'll get her." From far up the river came the whoop-whoroo of the drunken Indians. "Quick!" cried Claw. "Get that pack throwed together. When they get here and find out they ain't no more hooch, they'll butcher me and you." And almost before the Indian had secured the lashings, Claw started the dogs, and leaving the Indian to handle the gee-pole, struck out on the trail of Brent. It was no part of Claw's plan to overtake the trio. Indeed, it was the last thing in the world he wanted to do. At midnight they camped with a good 10 miles between themselves and the drunken Dog Ribs. In the morning they pushed on, keeping a sharp lookout ahead. Soon Brent's trail began to drift full of snow, and by noon it was obliterated altogether. Thereupon Claw ordered the Indian to shape his own course for Fort Norman, and because of Yondo's thorough knowledge of the country, arrived in sight of the post on the evening of the 16th day. When he learned from an Indian woodchopper that no other outfit had arrived, Claw pulled a mile up the river and waited. 2 days later, from the summit of a nearby hill, he saw the outfit pull in, and with glittering eyes he watched it depart, knowing that Brent would hit for the Yukon by way of the Bonnet Plume Pass. Claw paid off Yondo and struck straight westward alone, crossing the divide by means of a steep and narrow pass known only to a few. Thus shortening the trail by some 4 or 5 days, he showed up in Cuter Malone's Klondike Palace at the height of an evening's hilarity. Cuter greeted him from behind the bar. "Hello, Claw. Thought you was over with the whalers." "Was," answered Claw. "Just got back." He drained the glass Malone had set before him, and with a sidewise quirk of the head, sauntered into a little back room. A few minutes later Cuter followed, carefully closing and locking the door after him. "What's on your mind?" he asked, as he seated himself beside the little table. "There is a plenty on it, but mostly it's a girl." "What's the matter? One get away from you?" "She ain't yet, but she's damn near it. She'll be here in a few days, and she's the prettiest piece that ever hit the Yukon." "Must be right pert then, 'cause that's coverin' quite a bit of territory." "Yes, and you could cover twice as much and still not find nothin' that would touch her for looks." "Where is she?" "She's comin'. Ace In The Hole's bringin' her in." "Ace In The Hole? You're crazy as hell. First place, Ace In The Hole ain't here no more. Folks say old R.E. Morse got him, and he drownded hisself in the river. Camillo Bill and that bunch he used to trot with has combed Dawson with a fine-tooth comb fer him, and they ain't find him nowheres." "Drownded, hell!" exclaimed Claw. "Ain't I been to his shack on the Coppermine? Didn't he come up to the Belva Lou and get drunk, and then get lost, and then find his way back to his shack and choke the life out of Cap Jenkins? Yes, sir, bare-handed. I looked at Cap's throat where he lay dead on the floor, and it was damn near squoze in two. and he'd have squoze mine if he could caught me." "What about the gal? What's he got to do with her? He wouldn't stand for no such doin's, and you'd oughter know it. Didn't he knock you down for whalin' one with a dog whip?" "Yes, and I'll even up the score," growled Claw savagely. "And me and you'll shove a heft of dust in the safe for profits. It's like this. She's his girl, and he's bringin' her here." "His girl? Say, Claw, what you handin' me? Time was when Ace In The Hole could have had his pick of any of 'em. But that time's gone. They wouldn't no klooch look at him twice now. He's that far gone with the hooch. He's a bum." "You know a hell of a lot about it. Didn't you just get through tellin' me he was drownded? And now he's a bum? Both of which they ain't neither one right, by a damn sight. He's been out there where they ain't no hooch, and he's as good a man as he ever was, as long as he can't get the hooch. But here in Dawson he can get it, see? And me and you has got to see that he does get it. And we'll get the girl. I've figured it all out comin' over. Was goin' to fetch her myself, but it would have been a hell of a job, and then there's the Mounted. But this way we can get her delivered, C.O.D., right to our door, you might say. Startin' about day after tomorrow, we'll put lookouts on the Klondike River and the Indian River. They're comin' in over the Bonnet Plume. When they get here the lookout will tell us where they go. Then we rig up some kind of excuse to get him away, and when we've got him paralyzed drunk, we'll send a message to the girl that he needs her, and we'll bring her here, and, well, the middle room above the little dance hall upstairs will hold her. It's held 'em before." Malone grinned. "Guess I didn't know what I was up to when I built that room, eh? They can yell their head off, and you can't hear 'em outside the door. All right, Claw. You tend to the gettin' her here, and I'll pass the word around amongst the live ones that's got the dust. We ain't had no new ones in this winter, and the boys'll appreciate it." It was evening. Brent and Snowdrift had climbed from the little trail camp at the edge of the timber line to the very summit of the great Bonnet Plume Pass to watch the sun sink to rest behind the high-flung peaks of the almighty Alaskan ranges. "Oh, isn't it grand and wonderful!" cried the girl, as her eyes swept the vast panorama of glistening white mountains. "How small and insignificant I feel, and how stern and rugged and hard it all looks." "Yes, darling," whispered Brent, as his arm stole about her waist. "It is stern and rugged and hard. But it is clean and honest and grand. It is the world as God made it." "I have never been in the mountains before," said the girl. "I have seen them from the Mackenzie, but they were so far away they never seemed real. We have always hunted upon the barrens. Tell me, is it all like this? And where is the Yukon?" Brent smiled at her awe of the vastness. "Pretty much all like this," he answered. "Alaska is a land of mountains. Of course there are wide valleys, and mighty rivers, and along the rivers are the towns and the mining camps." "I have never seen a town," breathed the girl. "What will we do when we get there?" "We will go straight to the Reeveses," he answered with a glad smile. "Reeves is the man who staked me for the trip into the Barrens, and his wife is an old, old friend of mine. We were born and grew up in the same town, and we will go straight to them." "I wonder whether she will like me. I have known no white women except Sister Mercedes." "Darling, she will love you," cried Brent. "Everyone will love you, and we will be married in their house." "But what will he think when you tell him you have not made a strike?" Brent laughed. "He will be the first to see that I have made a strike, dear. The richest strike in all the North." "And you didn't tell me," cried the girl. "Tell me about it now. Was it on the copper mine?" "Yes, it was on the copper mine. I made the great strike, one evening in the moonlight, when the dearest girl in the world told me she loved me." Snowdrift raised her wondrous dark eyes to his. "Isn't it wonderful to love as we love?" she whispered. "To be all the world to each other? I do not care if we never make a strike. All I want is to be with you always. And if we do not make a strike, we will live in our tepee and snare rabbits, and hunt, and be happy always." Brent covered the upturned face with kisses. "I guess we can manage something better than a tepee," he smiled. "I've got more than half of Reese's dust left, and I've been thinking the matter over. The fact is, I don't think much of that Coppermine country for gold. I reckon we'll get a house and settle down in Dawson for a while, and I'll take the job Reeves offered me, and work till I get him paid off, and Camillo Bill, and enough ahead for a grub stake, and then we'll see what's to be done. We'll have lots of good times, too. There's the Reeveses, and Brent paused, and the girl smiled. "What's the matter? Can't you think of any more?" "Well, to tell the truth, I don't know any others that is, married folks, our kind, you know. The men I knew best are all single men. But lots of people have come in with the dredge companies. The Reeveses will know them." "There is that girl you called Kitty," suggested Snowdrift. "Yes," answered Brent, a little awkwardly. "That's so, but she's a little different." "But I will like her, I am sure, because she nursed you when you were sick. I know what you mean," she exclaimed abruptly, and Brent saw that the dark eyes flashed. "You mean that people point at her the finger of scorn, as they would have pointed at me, had I been as I thought I was. But it is all wrong, and I will not do that. And I will hate those who do. And I will tell them so." She stamped her moccasined foot in anger, and the man laughed. "My goodness!" he exclaimed, feigning alarm. "I can see from here where I better get home to meals on time, and not forget to put the cat out." "Now you are making fun of me," she pouted. "But it is wrong, and you know it is, and maybe the very ones who do the pointing are worse in their hearts than she is." "You said it," cried Brent. "The ones that look down upon the frailties of others are the very ones who need watching themselves. And that is a good thing to remember in picking out friends. And darling, you can go as far as you like with Kitty. I'm for you. She's got a big heart, and there's a lot more to her than there is to most of 'em. But come, it's dark, and we must be getting back to camp. See the little fire down on the edge of the timber line. It looks 1,000 miles away." And as they picked their way, side by side, down the long slope, Brent was conscious that with the growing tenderness that each day's association with his wonder woman engendered, there was also a growing respect for her outlook upon life. Her years in the open had developed a sense of perception that was keen to separate the dross from the pure gold of human intent. "She's a great girl," he breathed, as he glanced at her profile, half hidden in the starlight. "She deserves the best that's in a man, and she'll get it." End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Snowdrift, A Story of the Land of the Strong Cold, by James Hendryx. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Snowdrift, by James Hendryx. Chapter 23 In the Toils. Late one afternoon, a dog sled, with Joe Pete in the lead, and Brent and Snowdrift following, swung rapidly down the Klondike River. A few miles from Dawson, the outfit overtook a man walking leisurely toward town, a rifle swung over his shoulder. Recognizing him as one Zinn, a former hanger-on at Cutter Malone's, Brent called a greeting. "Damned if it ain't Ace in the hole!" cried the man, in well-simulated surprise. "They'll be rolling 'em high in Dawson tonight." Brent laughed and hurried on, and behind him upon the trail Zinn quickened his pace. At the outskirts of town the three removed their snowshoes and, ordering Joe Pete to take the outfit to his own shack, Brent and Snowdrift hurried toward the Reeveses. As they passed up the street, Brent noticed that the dark eyes of the girl were busily drinking in the details of the rows upon rows of low-frame houses. "At last you are in Dawson," he said, including with a sweep of the arm the mushroom city that had sprung up in the shadow of Moosehide Mountain. "Does it look like you expected it would? Are you going to like it?" The girl smiled at the eagerness in his voice. "Yes, dear, I shall love it, because it will be our home. It isn't quite as I expected it to look. The houses, all placed side by side, with the streets running between, are as I thought they would be, but the houses themselves are different. They are not of logs, or of the thin iron, like the warehouse of the new trading company on the Mackenzie, and they are not made of bricks and stones and very tall like the pictures of cities in the books." Brent laughed. "No, Dawson is just halfway between. Since the sawmills came, the town has rapidly outgrown the log cabin stage, although there are still plenty of them here, but it has not yet risen to the dignity of brick and stone." "But the houses of brick and stone will come," cried the girl, enthusiastically, "and take the place of the houses of wood, and we shall be here to see the building of another great city." Brent shook his head. "I don't know," he replied doubtfully. "It all depends on the gravel. I wouldn't care to do much speculating in Dawson real estate right now. The time for that has passed. The next 2 or 3 years will tell the story. If I were to do any predicting, I'd say that instead of the birth of a great city, we are going to witness the lingering death of an overgrown town." He paused and pointed to a small cabin of logs that stood deserted, half buried in snow. "Do you see that shack over there? That's mine. It don't look like much now, but I gave $5,000 in dust for it when I made my first strike." The girl's eyes sparkled as she viewed the dejected-looking building. "And that will be our home!" she cried. "Not by a long shot it won't," laughed Brent. "We'll do better than that. I never want to see the inside of the place again. Yes, I do, just once. I want to go there and get a book, the book that lured me to the Coppermine. The book in which is written the name of Murdo McFarlane. We will always keep that book, darling, and some day we will get it bound in leather and gold." Before a little white-painted house that stood back from the street, the man paused. "The Reeveses live here," he announced, and as he turned into the neatly shoveled path that led to the door, he reached down and pressed the girl's hand reassuringly. "Mrs. Reeves is an old, old friend," he whispered. "She will be a sister to you." As Brent led the way along the narrow path, His eyes rested upon the slope of snow-buried earth that pitched sharply against the base of the walls of the house. "Hardest work I ever did," he grinned. "Hope the floor kept warm." As he waited the answer to his knock upon the door, he noticed casually that Zinn sauntered past and turned abruptly into the street that led straight to Cuter Malone's. The next instant the door was opened and Reba Reeves stood framed in the doorway. Brent saw that in the gloom of early evening she did not recognize him. "Is Mr. Reeves home?" he asked. "Yes, won't you step in?" answered the woman, standing aside. "Thank you, I think we will." Something in the man's tone caused the woman to step quickly forward and peer sharply into his face. "Carter Brent!" she cried, and the next instant the man's hands were in both of hers, and she was pulling him into the room. Like a flash Brent remembered that other time she had called his name in a tone of intense surprise, and that there had been tears in her eyes then, even as there were tears in her eyes now, but this time they were tears of gladness. And then from another room came Reeves, and a pair of firm hands were laid upon his shoulders, and he was spun around to meet the gaze of the searching gray eyes that stared into his own. Brent laughed happily as he noted the start of surprise that accompanied Reeves's words. "Good Lord! What a change!" A hand slipped from his shoulder and grasped his own. A moment later Brent freed the hand, and as Mrs. Reeves lighted the lamp, turned and drew Snowdrift toward him. "And now I want you to meet Miss Margot McFarlane. Within a very few hours she is going to become Mrs. Carter Brent. You see," he added, turning to Reba Reeves, "I brought her straight to you. The hotel isn't—" The sentence was never finished. Already the two women were in each other's arms, and Reba Reeves was smiling at him over the girl's shoulder. "Carter Brent, if you had dared to even think of taking her to the hotel, I'd never have spoken to you again. You just let me catch you talking about hotels, when your folks are living right here. And now take off your things, because supper is most ready. You'll find warm water in the reservoir of the stove, and I'll make an extra lot of good hot coffee, because I know you will be tired of tea." Never in his life had Brent enjoyed a meal as he enjoyed that supper in the dining room of the Reeveses, with Snowdrift, radiant with happiness, beside him, and his host and hostess eagerly plying him with questions. "I think it is the most romantic thing I ever heard of," cried Reba Reeves, when Snowdrift had finished telling of her life among the Indians and at the mission. "It's easy enough to see why Carter chose you, but for the life of me I can't see how you came to take an old scapegrace like him," she teased, and the girl smiled. "I took him because I love him," she answered. "Because he is good, and strong, and brave, and because he can be gentle and tender and he understands. And he is not a scapegrace any more," she added, gravely. "He has told me all about how he drank hooch until he became a bun—" "A what?" "A bun— is it not that when a man drinks too much hooch?" "A bum," supplied Brent, laughing. "So many new words," smiled the girl. "But I will learn them all. Anyway, we will fight the hooch together, and we will win." "You bet we'll win," cried Reeves, heartily. "And if I'm any judge, I'd say you've won already. How about it, Brent?" Deliberately, thoughtfully, Brent nodded. "She has won," he said. "On the word of a Brent?" Reba Reeves's eyes were looking straight into his own as she asked the question. "Yes," he answered, "on the word of a Brent." A moment's silence followed the words, after which he turned to Reeves. "And now let's talk business. I have used about half the dust you loaned me. There is nothing worth while on the Coppermine now." He smiled as his eyes rested upon the girl. "So I have come back to take that job you offered me. 1,100 miles we came, under the chaperonage of Joe Pete." "And a very capable chaperonage it was," laughed Reeves. "Funniest thing I ever saw in my life, there in your cabin the morning you started. It was then I learned to know Joe Pete. But go on." "That's about all there is to it, except that I'd like to keep the rest of the dust, and pay you back in installments, that is, if the job is still open. I've got to borrow enough for a start, somewhere, and I reckon you're about the only friend I've got left." "How about that fellow Camillo Bill? I thought he was a friend of yours." "I thought so too, but when I was down and out, and wanted a grub stake, he turned me down. He's all right, though, square as a die." "About that job," continued Reeves, gravely, "I'm a little afraid you wouldn't just fill the bill." For a moment Brent felt as though he had been slapped in the face. He had counted on the job, needed it. The next instant he was smiling. "Maybe you're right," he said. "I reckon I am a little rusty on hydraulics, and—" "I'd take a chance on the hydraulics," laughed Reeves. "But, before we go any further, what would you take for your title to those 2 claims that Camillo Bill has been operating?" "Depends on who wanted to buy 'em," grinned Brent. "What would you sell them to me for?" "What will you give?" "How would 10,000 for the 2 of them strike you?" Brent laughed. "Don't you go speculating on any claims," he advised. "I'd be tickled to death to get $10,000, or 10,000 cents out of those claims, but not from you. It would be highway robbery." "And if I didn't buy them from you at 10,000 or 100,000, you would be only a piker of a robber, as compared to me." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if anybody offers you $1,000,000 for 'em, you laugh at 'em," exclaimed Reeves, "because they're worth a whole lot more than that." Brent stared at the man as though he had taken leave of his senses. "Who has been stringing you?" he asked. "The fact is, those claims are a liability and not an asset. Camillo Bill took them over to try to get the $1,000,000 I owed him out of him. And he couldn't do it. And when Camillo Bill can't get the dust out, it isn't there." "How do you know he couldn't do it?" "Because he told me so." "He lied." Brent flushed. "I reckon you don't know Camillo Bill," he said gravely. "As I told you, he wouldn't grubstake me when I needed a grubstake, and I don't understand that. But I'd stake my life on it that he never lied about those claims, never tried to beat me out of 'em when I was down and out. Why, man, he won them in a game of stud, and he wouldn't stake them." "But he lied to you, just the same," insisted Reeves, and Brent saw that the man's eyes were twinkling. "And it was because he is one of the best friends a man ever had that he did lie to you, and that he wouldn't grubstake you. You said a while ago that I was about the only friend you had left. Let me tell you a little story, and then judge for yourself. About a week after you had gone, inquiries began to float around town as to your whereabouts. I didn't pay any attention to them at first, but the inquiries persisted. They searched Dawson, and all the country around, for you. When I learned that the inquiries emanated from such men as Camillo Bill, and Old Bettles, and Moosehide Charlie, and a few more of the heaviest men in the camp, I took notice, and quietly sent for Camillo Bill and had a talk with him. It seems that after he had taken his $1 million out of the claims, he went to you for the purpose of turning them back. He had not seen you for some time, and he was, well, it didn't take him but a minute to see what would happen if he turned back the claims and dumped a couple of $1 million worth of property into your hands at that time. So he told you they had petered out. Then he hunted up a bunch of the real estate sourdoughs who are your friends, and they planned to kidnap you and take you away for a year, keep you under guard in a cabin, 100 miles from nowhere, and keep you off the liquor and make you work like a nigger till you found yourself again. They laid their plot, and when they came to spring it, you had disappeared." Brent listened with tight-pressed lips, and as Reeves finished, he asked, "And you say he got out his $1 million, and there is still something left in the gravel?" Reeves laughed. "I would call it something. Camillo Bill says he only worked one of the claims, and only about half of that. Yes, I would say there was something left." "I reckon a man don't always know his friends," murmured Brent after a long silence. "I wonder where I can find Camillo Bill." "He's in town somewhere. I saw him this afternoon." Brent turned to Snowdrift, who had listened, wide-eyed, to the narrative. "You wait here, dear," he said, "and I'll hunt up a parson, and a ring, and Camillo Bill. I need a best man." "Oh, why don't you wait a week or so, and give us time to get ready, so we can have a real wedding?" cried Mrs. Reeves. Brent shook his head. "I reckon this one'll be real enough," he grinned. "And besides, we've waited quite a while already." As he turned into the street from the path leading from the door, he almost bumped into a man in the darkness. "Hello, is that you, Ace in the Hole? You're the man I'm hunting for. Friend of yourn's hurt and wants to see you." "Who is it, Zinn? And how did he know I was in town?" "It's Camillo Bill. I was tellin' I seed you comin' in, an hour or so back, in Stoell's. Then Camillo, he goes down to the sawmill to see about some lumber, and a log flies off the carriage and hits him. He's busted up pretty bad. Guess he's goin' to cash in. They carried him to a shack over back of the mill, and he's hollerin' for you." "Come on then, quick!" cried Brent. "What the hell are you standing there for? Have they got a doctor?" "Yup," answered Zinn as he hurried toward the outskirts of the town. "He'll be there by now." Along the dark streets and through a darker lumber yard hurried Zinn, with Brent close at his heels urging him to greater speed. At length they passed around behind the sawmill, and Brent saw that a light showed dimly in the window of a disreputable log shack that stood upon the edge of a deep ravine. The next moment he had pushed through the door and found himself in the presence of 4 as evil-looking specimens as ever broke the commandments. One of them he recognized as Stumpy Cooley, a man who 2 years before had escaped the noose only by prompt action of the mounted, after he had been duly convicted by a meeting of outraged miners of robbing a cache. "Where's Camillo Bill?" demanded Brent, his eyes sweeping the room. "Took him to the hospital just now," informed Stumpy. "Hospital?" cried Brent. "Yes, built one since you was here. But you don't need to be in no hurry, 'cause he's out of his head now." The man produced a bottle, and pulling the cork, offered it to Brent. "Might's well have a little drink, and we'll be goin'." "To hell with your drinks!" cried Brent. "Where is this hospital?" Suddenly he sensed that something was wrong. and whirling saw that two of the men had slipped between himself and the door. He turned to Stumpy to see an evil grin upon the man's face. "When I ask anyone to drink with me, he most generally does it," he sneered, "or I know the reason why." "There's the reason," roared Brent, and quick as a flash his right fist smashed into the man's face, the blow knocking him clean across the room. The next instant a man sprang into Brent's back and another dived for his legs, while a third struck at him with a short piece of scantling. Brent fought like a tiger, weaving this way and that, and stumbling about the room in a vain effort to rid himself of the two men who clung to him like leeches. Stumpy staggered toward him, and Brent, making a frenzied effort to release one of his pinioned arms, saw him raise the heavy quart whiskey bottle. The next instant it descended with a full arm swing. Brent saw a blinding flash of light, a stab of pain seemed to pierce his very brain, his knees buckled suddenly, and he was falling, down, down, down into a bottomless pit of intense blackness. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Snowdrift, A Story of the Land of the Strong Cold, by James B. Hendryx. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Snowdrift, by James B. Hendryx. Chapter 24. The Fight at Cutter Malone's. The porter at Cutter Malone's Klondike Palace was lighting the huge oil lamps as the girl called Kitty sauntered to the bar with her dancing partner, who loudly demanded wine. Cutter Malone himself, standing behind the bar in earnest conversation with Johnny Claw, set out the drinks, and as the girl raised her glass, a man brushed past her. She recognized Zinn, one of Malone's despicable lieutenants, and was quick to note that something unusual was in the air. A swift, meaning glance passed between Claw and Malone, and as Zinn stepped around the bar to deposit his rifle, he whispered earnestly to the two who stepped close to listen. Unperceived, Kitty managed to edge near, and the next instant she was all attention. For as the detached words that came to her ears, she made out "Ace in the Hole" and "the girl," and then Malone, whose voice carried above the others, issued an order, "The shack behind the sawmill. Get him soused, knock him out if you have to, but don't kill him. Once we get the girl here, me and Claw—" The rest of the sentence was lost as it blended with an added order of Claw's. "Ace in the hole," thought Kitty. What did it mean? And who is "the girl"? Ace in the Hole is dead, and yet— She glanced toward Claw, whose beady eyes were glittering with excitement. "He just came back from somewhere. Maybe he knows something." She saw Zinn cross the room and speak in a whisper to four men who were playing solo at a table near the huge stove. She knew those men, Stumpy Cooley and his three companions. The men nodded and went on with their game, and Zinn returned and resumed his conversation with Malone and Claw. But the girl could hear nothing more. The Professor was loudly banging out the notes of the next dance upon the piano, and her partner was pulling at her arm. For 2 hours Kitty danced, and between dances she drank wine at the bar, and always her eyes were upon the four men at the solo table, and upon Zinn, who loafed close by, and upon Malone and Claw, who she noted were drinking more than usual as they hobnobbed behind the bar. The evening crowd foregathered. The music became faster, the talk louder, the laughter wilder. At the conclusion of a dance, Kitty saw Malone speak to Zinn, who immediately slipped out the door. The four men at the table threw down their cards and sauntered casually from the room, and declined the next dance. The girl dashed up the stairway to her room, where she kicked off her high-heeled slippers, pulled a pair of heavy woolen stockings over her silk ones, and hurriedly laced her moccasins. She jammed a cap over her ears, and slipping into a heavy fur coat, stepped out into the hall and came face to face with Johnny Claw. "Where do you think you're going?" asked the man with a sneer. "It's none of your business," snapped the girl. "I don't have to ask you when I want to go anywhere, and I don't have to tell you where I'm going, either. You haven't got any strings on me." "Well, forget it, 'cause you ain't going nowheres, not right now." "Get out of my way, damn you!" cried the girl. "If I had a gun here, I'd blow your rotten heart out." "But you ain't got none, and I have, so it's the other way around. Only I ain't gonna kill you if you do like I say. Listen here, I seen you easin' over and trying to hear what me and Malone and Zinn was talking about. I don't know how much you heard, but you heard enough, so you kept pretty close cases on all of us. Go on back in your room 'fore I put you there. What the hell do you care, anyhow? All we want is the girl. Once we get her up in the strong room, you can have Ace in the hole. And as long as she's around, you ain't nowhere with him. Why don't you use your head?" "You fool!" screamed the girl in a sudden fury, and as she tried to spring past him, Claw's fist caught her squarely in the chin, and without a sound she crashed backward across the door-sill. Swiftly the man reached down and dragged her into the room, removed the key from the lock on the inside, closed and locked the door, and thrusting the key into his pocket, turned and walked downstairs. How long she lay there, Kitty did not know. Consciousness returned slowly. She was aware of a dull ache in her head, and after what seemed like a long time, she struggled to her knees, and drew herself onto the bed, where she lay trying to think what had happened. Faintly, from below, drifted the sound of the piano. So they were still dancing down there? Then suddenly the whole train of events flashed through her brain. She leaped to her feet and staggered groggily to the door. It was locked. In vain she screamed and beat upon the panels. She rushed to the window, but its double sash of heavily frosted panes, nailed tight for the winter, was immovable. In a sudden frenzy of rage, she seized a chair and smashed the glass. The inrush of cold air felt good to her throbbing temples, and wrenching a leg from the chair, she beat away the jagged fragments until only the frame remained. Leaning far out, she looked down. Her room was at the side of the building, near the rear, and she saw that a huge snowdrift had formed where the wind eddied around the corner. Only a moment she hesitated. Then, standing upright on the sill, she leaped far out and landed squarely in the center of the huge drift. Struggling to her feet, she wallowed to the street, and ran swiftly through the darkness in the direction of the sawmill. And at that very moment, Zinn was knocking upon the door of the Reeves home. When the door had closed behind Brent, Mrs. Reeves had insisted upon Snowdrift's taking a much-needed rest upon the lounge in the living room, and, dispatching Reeves upon an errand to a neighbor's, busied herself in the kitchen. The girl lay back among the pillows, wondering when her lover would return, when the sound of the knock sent her flying to the door. She drew back startled when, instead of Brent, she was confronted by the man they had passed on the river. "Is there a lady here name of Snowdrift?" asked the man. A sudden premonition of evil shot through the girl's heart. She paled to the lips. Where was Brent? Had something happened? Yes, yes, she answered quickly. I am Snowdrift. What has happened? Why do you want me? It's him, your man, Ace in the Hole, he answered. Oh, what is it? Cried the girl, in a frenzy of impatience. Has he been hurt? Well, not just hurt, you might say. He's loadin' up on hooch. Some of us friends of his'n tried to make him go easy, but it ain't no use. I seen you and him comin' in on the river, and I figured maybe you could handle him. We're afraid someone'll rob him when he gets good and drunk. And not more than an hour ago he had given his promise, on the word of a Brent, a promise that Mrs. Reeves had just finished telling her would never be broken. A low sob that ended in a moan trembled upon the girl's lips. "Wait!" she commanded, and slipping into the room, caught up her cap and parka, and stepping out into the darkness, closed the door noiselessly behind her. "Take me to him, quickly," she said. "Surely he will listen to me." "That's what I figured," answered the man, and turning, led the way down the dark street. Presently the subdued light that filtered through the frosted windows of the Klondike Palace came into view, and as they reached the place, Zinn led the way to the rear and pushed open a door. Snowdrift found herself in a dimly lighted hallway. Cuter Malone stepped forward with a smile. "Just a minute, lady. Better put this here veil over your face. He's upstairs, and we got to go in through the bar. They's a lot of folks in there, and they ain't no use to you bein' gopped at. With this on, they won't notice but what it's one of the women that lives here." Snowdrift fastened the heavy veil over her face, and taking her arm, Malone piloted her through the bar-room and up the stairs. Through the mesh of the veil, Snowdrift caught a confused vision of many men standing before a long bar, of other men, and women in gay colors dancing upon a smooth stretch of floor, and her ears rang with the loud crashing of the piano. Bewildered, confused, she tightened her grasp upon Malone's arm. At the head of the stairs, the man paused and opened a door. "You can take off the veil now," he said as he locked the door behind them. "They ain't no one up here." A sudden terror possessed the girl, and she glanced swiftly into the man's face. "But where is he?" "Oh, he's on up," he assured her. "This way." He led the way across the room known as the small dance hall, and through a passage from which doors opened on either side, to a flight of stairs in the rear. At the head of the stairs the girl could see a light burning. He motioned her to proceed, and as she gained the top, a man stepped out from the shadow and seized her arms. One look into his face and the girl gave a wild shriek of terror. The man was Johnny Claw. The next moment she found herself thrust into a room lighted only by a single candle. It was a bare, forbidding-looking room, windowless and with a door of thick planking secured by a hasp and padlock upon the outside. Its single article of furniture was a bed. "So," leered Claw, "you thought you could get away from me, did you? Thought you was playin' hell when you and Ace in the Hole hit for Dawson, did you? Well, you played hell all right, but not like you figured. You're mine now." Trembling so that her limbs refused to support her, Snowdrift sank down upon the bed. "Oh, where is he?" she moaned. Claw laughed. "Oh, he's all right," he mocked. "He's soused to the guards by this time, And after I and some friends of mine get him to sign a deed to a couple of claims he owns, we'll feed him to the fish." The girl tried to rise, but her muscles refused to obey the dictates of her brain, and she sank back upon the bed. "You'll be all right here when you get used to it. The girls all have a lot of fun. I'm going below now. You stay here and think it over. 'Tain't no use to holler. This room's built a purpose to tame the likes of you in. Some of 'em that's been in here has walked out, and some of 'em has been carried out, but none of 'em has ever got out. And just so you don't take no fool notion to burn the house down, I'll take this candle along. I got a horror of burnin'." Again he laughed harshly, and the next moment Snowdrift found herself in darkness, and heard the padlock rattle in the hasp. Kitty drew swiftly into the intense blackness between two lumber piles. She heard the sound of voices coming toward her, and a moment later she could distinguish the words. "Damn him! He'd like to busted my jaw. God, what a wallop he's got! But I fixed him when I smashed that quart over his head." "Maybe he'll bleed to death," ventured another. "Nah, he ain't cut bad. I seen the gash over his eye. He's bloody as hell, but he looks worse'n he is. Say, you sure you tied him tight? He's been out damn near an hour, and he'll be comin' to 'fore long, and believe me—" The men passed out of hearing, and Kitty slipped from cover and sped toward the shack, the outline of which she could see beyond the corner of the sawmill. She made sure that all four of the men were together, so she pushed in without hesitation. "Hello," she called softly. "Ace in the hole, you hear?" No answer, and she moved further into the room and stumbled over the prostrate form of a man. Swiftly she dropped to her knees and assured herself that his hands and feet were tied. Deftly her fingers explored his pockets until they found his knife, and a moment later the thongs that bound him were severed. Her hand rested for a second upon his forehead, and with a low cry she withdrew it, wet and sticky with blood. Leaping to her feet, she procured a handful of snow which she dashed into his face. Again and again she repeated the performance, and then he moved. He muttered feebly and received more snow. Then she bent close to his ear. "Listen, Ace in the Hole, it's me, Kitty." "Kitty," murmured the man uncertainly. "Snowdrift." "Yes, I lit in a snowdrift all right when I jumped out the window. But how did you know? Come, wake up. Is there a light here?" "Where am I?" "In the shack back of the sawmill." "Where's Camillo Bill?" "Camillo Bill? He's up at Stoell's, I guess. But listen, give me a match." Clumsily Brent fumbled in his pocket and produced a match. Kitty seized it and in the flare of its flame saw a candle upon the table. She held the flame to the wick, and in the flickering light Brent sat up and glanced about him. The air was heavy with the reek of the whiskey from the broken bottle. His head hurt, and he raised his hand and withdrew it, red with blood. Then he leaped unsteadily to his feet. "Damn 'em!" he roared. "It was a plant! What's their game?" "I know what it is!" cried Kitty. "Quick, tell me, have you got a girl, here in Dawson?" "Yes, at Reeves. Her name is Snowdrift, and she—" "Come then, we ain't got any time to lose. It's Cuter Malone and that damned Johnny Claw." "Johnny Claw!" cried Brent. "Claw is 1,000 miles from here, on the copper mine. He's right this minute in the Klondike Palace, and your girl will be there too if you don't shake your legs. They framed this play to get her, and I heard him, partly. If I'd known where she was, I'd have gone there first, but I didn't know." Already Brent was staggering from the room, and Kitty ran close beside him. The cold air revived the man, and he ran steadily when he reached the street. "Tell me," panted Kitty at his side, "this girl, is she straight?" "I'm going to marry her tonight," cried the man. "Then hurry, for Christ's sake," sobbed Kitty. "Oh, hurry, hurry." At a certain street corner Kitty halted suddenly, and Brent ran on. He rushed into Reeves' house like a whirlwind. "Where's Snowdrift?" he cried, as the Reeves stared wide-eyed at the blood-soaked apparition. "What has happened?" "Where is she?" yelled Brent, his eyes glaring like a madman's. We don't know. I was in the kitchen and—" But Brent had dashed from the room, and when Reeves found his hat, the madman had disappeared in the darkness. Quite a group of old-timers had foregathered at Stoell's. Moosehide Charlie drifted in, and seeing Camillo Bill, Swiftwater Bill, and Old Bettles standing at the bar, he joined them. "What do you say we start a regular old he-man's game of stud?" he asked. "We ain't had no real game for quite a while." Camillo Bill shook his head slowly. "No, not for me. I'll play a reasonable game, but do you know since Ace In The Hole went plumb to hell the way he done over the game, I kind of took a dislikin' to it." "It was the hooch more'n the stud," argued Bettles. "Maybe it was, but damn it was 'em both. There was one hombre I liked." "Wonder if he'll come back," mused Swiftwater Bill. "Sure as hell," affirmed Camillo. "Will he have sense enough to lay off the hooch?" "I don't know, but I got $20,000 says he will." Camillo Bill looked defiantly around. "Take it," cried Swiftwater Bill, "and I hope to hell I lose." The door burst open, and Kitty, gasping for breath, hurtled into the room. "Camillo Bill!" she screamed. "Quick, all of you! Hey, you sourdoughs!" Her voice rose to a shriek, and men crowded from the tables in the rear. "Come on! Ace In The Hole needs us! He's back! And he's brought a girl! They're going to be married! But Claw and Cuter Malone framed it to steal her! He's gone down there now!" she panted. "Come on! They hired a gang to get Ace In The Hole, and they damn near did!" With a yell, Camillo Bill reached clear over the bar and grabbed one of Stoell's guns, and an instant later, followed by a crowd of lesser lights, the big men of Yukon rushed down the street, led by Kitty and Camillo Bill and Stoell himself, who, another gun in hand, had vaulted the bar without waiting to put on his coat or his cap. "They'll take her upstairs, way up," gasped Kitty as she ran. "And for God's sake, hurry!" Bareheaded, his face covered with blood, a human cyclone burst through the door of the Klondike Palace. Straight for the bar he rushed, bowling men over like tenpins. Cuter Malone flashed one startling glance and reached for his gun, but before he could grasp it, the shape hurdled the bar and the two went to the floor in a crash of glass. Brent's hand first found the gun, and gripping it by the barrel, he brought it crashing down on Cutter's head. Leaping to his feet, he fired, and the bartender, bung starter in hand, sprawled on top of his employer. Across the room came a rush of men, Stumpy Cooley, Zinn, and others. Again Brent fired, and Zinn crumpled slowly to the floor. Stumpy whirled a chair above his head, and Brent dodged as the missile crashed into the mirror above the back bar. The barroom was a pandemonium of noise. Men crowded in from the dance hall, bent upon overpowering the madman who had interrupted their frolic. Screaming women rushed for the stairs. Brent was lifted from his feet and rushed bodily halfway across the room, the very numbers of his assailants protecting him from 100 blows. Weaving, milling, the crowd surged this way and that, striking at Brent and hitting each other. They surged against the stove, and it crashed upon its side, filling the room with smoke from the toppling pipe, and covering the floor with blazing chunks of wood and live coals. Suddenly, through the doors swept a whirlwind of human shapes. The surging crowd went down before the onrush, and Brent struggled madly to free himself from the thrashing arms and legs. Revolvers barked, chairs crashed against heads and against other chairs. Roulette and faro layouts were splintered, and poker tables were smashed like kindling wood, men seizing upon the legs for weapons. And above all rose the sound of crashing glass and the shrill shrieks of women. The room filled with choking smoke. Flames ate into the floor and shot up the wooden walls. The door at the head of the stairs opened suddenly, and Brent caught sight of the white face of Claw. He was afraid to shoot, for the frenzied girls, instead of seeking safety in the street, had crowded upon the stairs and were pouring through the door which Claw was vainly trying to close. The smoke sucked upward, and the flames crackled more loudly, fanned by the new-formed draft. Struggling through the fighting, surging men, Brent gained the foot of the stairs. He saw Claw raise his gun, and the next instant a figure flashed between. The gun roared, and the figure crumpled to the floor. It was Kitty. With an oath, Brent sprang up the stairway as the flames roared behind him. He turned for an instant, and as his eyes swept the room, he saw Camillo Bill stoop and gather Kitty into his arms and stagger toward the front door. Other men were helping the wounded from the room. Someone yelled at Brent to come down and save himself. He glanced toward the speaker. It was Bettles, and even as he looked, the man was forced to retreat before the flames and was lost to view. At the head of the stairs, Brent slammed the door shut. The little dance hall was full of girls huddled together, shrieking. Other girls were stumbling from their rooms with their belongings in their arms. From the narrow hallway that led to the rear rushed Claw. The man seemed beside himself with terror. His eyes were wide and staring, and he made for a window, cursing shrilly as he forced his way through the close-packed crowd of girls, striking them, knocking them down, and trampling on them. He did not see Brent, and seizing a chair, drove it through the window. The floor was hot, and the air thick with smoke. Claw was about to leap to safety when, like a panther, Brent sprang upon him and bore him to the floor. He reached out swiftly, and his fingers buried themselves in the man's throat, as they had buried themselves in the captain's. He glared into the terror-wide eyes of the worst man in the North, and laughed aloud. An unnatural, maniacal laugh it was, that chilled the hearts of the cowering girls. "Kill him!" shrilled one hysterically. "Kill him! Kill him!" Others took up the cry. Brent threw Claw onto his belly, placed his knees upon the small of his back, locked the fingers of both hands beneath the man's chin, and pulled slowly and steadily upward. Backward came Claw's head as he tore frantically at Brent's arms with his two hands. Upward and backward came the man's head and shoulders, and Brent shortened his leverage by suddenly slipping his forearms instead of his fingers beneath Claw's chin. Strangling sounds came gurgling from his throat. Brent leaned backward, adding the weight of his body to the pull of his arms. Claw's back was bent sharply upward, just in front of the knees that held him to the floor, and summoning all his strength, Brent surged backward, straining every muscle of his body until it seemed he could not pull another pound. Suddenly there was a dull, audible snap, and Claw folded backward. Brent released his grip, and leaping to his feet, rushed back through the hallway and up the stairs. A door of thick planking stopped him, and upon a hasp he saw a heavy padlock. Jerking the gun from his belt, he placed the muzzle against the lock and pulled the trigger. There was a deafening explosion, and the padlock flew open and swung upon its staple. Dashing into the room, Brent snatched Snowdrift into his arms and rushed down the stairs. Pausing at the window Claw had smashed, he stood the girl upon her feet, and knocking the remaining glass from the sash with the butt of the gun, he grabbed one of the screaming girls and pitched her into the big snowdrift that ranged along the whole length of the burning building. It was light as day now, the flames were leaping high above the roof at the front, and already tongues of red were showing around the doorway at the head of the stairs. A great crowd had collected, and at the sight of the girl's form hurtling through the air, they surged to the spot. Spurts of smoke and tiny jet-like flames were finding their way through the cracks of the floor. Brent realized there was no time to lose, and seizing another girl, he pitched her out. Then he took them as they came, big ones and little ones, fully dressed and half-dressed, screaming, fighting, struggling to get away, or to be taken next. He pitched them out until only Snowdrift remained. Lifting her to the window, he told her to jump, and watched to see her light safely in the snow. Smoke was pouring through the fast-widening cracks in the floor. Brent leaped to the window sill. As he stood poised, a section of the floor between himself and Claw dropped through, and a rush of flames shot upward. Suddenly he saw Claw's arms thrash wildly. "My God!" the man shrieked. "My back's broke! I'm burnin' up!" The whole floor let go, and a furnace of overpowering flame rushed upward as he jumped, almost into the waiting arms of Camillo Bill. "It's Ace in the hole, all right!" yelled the big man, as he grasped Brent's shoulders and rocked him back and forth. "And by God, he's as good a man as he ever was." "Where's Kitty?" asked Brent, when he could get his breath. "I saw her go down. She stopped Claw's bullet that was meant for me, and I saw you carry her out." "Kitty's all right," whispered Camillo Bill in his ear, and Brent glanced quickly into the man's shining eyes. "Just nicked in the shoulder, and say, I've always wanted her, but she wouldn't have me. But now you're out of the way. I told her all over again how I stood, and damned if she didn't take me." The End. End of chapter 24. Recording by Roger Moline. End of Snowdrift, a story of the land of the strong cold.